Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. As you can tell, I got a haircut, some new glasses, and I happen to be 2 months post-op bottom surgery. And that's partially why I've decided to create this video. I want to create a bit of an educational resource for anyone who wants to go through bottom surgery, specifically anyone who might want to go through bottom surgery at Mount Sinai, or anyone that's interested in metoidiplasty. So before I get started, I just want to put out a general warning that I am going to be talking about things in some very anatomical terms. I'll talk about things like bleeding, surgery. If you have any sort of medical fears that involve needles, blood, probably best not to watch this video, but overall, I'm just really excited to share. Alright, so first off, what bottom surgery did I get? Many of you know that there are two major surgical techniques for female to male bottom surgery. That's metoidiplasty and phalloplasty. Now, so far, I've had a full metoidiplasty, and for those that don't know, metoidiplasty basically involves using the existing natal tissue to create a neophallus. So I actually wanted a phalloplasty, and it just so happens that my surgeon performs metoidiplasty as the first stage of that. So this is what my staging looks like. The first stage was a full metoidiplasty. That's the creation of the neophallus, creation of the scrotum, scrotoplasty, the vaginectomy, so removal of the vaginal canal, hysterectomy, and the oophorectomy, so that's the removal of the ovaries and the uterus. Now, I also got something known as a DIEP Flap, which I'll get into a little later. It was required for future stages of phalloplasty, so maybe not really relevant to talk about at the moment. And the last thing I got was urethral lengthening so that I could fully use the neophallus to urinate. Now, the second stage is going to involve creation of the phallus and a suprapubic catheter being inserted so I can urinate out of that catheter. The third stage would involve the connection of the old urethra, so that's the urethra from the metoidiplasty, and then the new urethra for the phalloplasty itself. Now, any future stages would be glandsplasty, testicular implants, potentially an ED device in the leg. Alright, so the process of getting surgery, what exactly did that look like? Now, obviously I had to get my surgical letters first, so I had to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. I had to get surgical letters from 2 mental health providers and 1 PCP. I went through Mount Sinai for my bottom surgery, and the way that Mount Sinai is set up is they actually require that you go through their own social workers and their own psychologists, right, for a surgical letter. And they provide these surgical letters to your insurance. So I basically had to speak to these 2 mental health providers. They gave me surgical letters, and these were later provided and approved by my insurance. After getting these letters, I then had to consult with my bottom surgeons. So that's both the plastic surgeon and the OBGYN. Bear in mind that I did have to undress for these. The plastic surgeon required a physical examination, but the OBGYN, she basically told me that if I felt too uncomfortable, I didn't have to undress, and I later ended up not undressing, so I'm really grateful for that. Alright, fast forward 4 months, and I've now got a surgery date, and I go in for surgery. I wake up at 4 a.m., not allowed to eat anything, take the subway to the hospital. When I get there, I fill out a bunch of their insurance forms, their consent forms. The surgeons were really cautious about making sure that I understood the procedure, that I could articulate their risks. And so I signed those consent forms, changed into a surgical gown, and headed to the operating table. Like, literally walked myself to the operating table and sat down on it. And so at some point, I'm on the operating table, and they start to, I wouldn't say they really tied my arms down, but they had me sort of spread my arms apart like this and lie down, so it was kind of awkward. And then they put these leg cuffs on my legs. It sort of felt like leg warmers. I guess that was to circulate the blood. And then the last thing they did was insert an IV, and I pretty much passed out after that, woke up in the recovery room. And man, I felt like I was hit by a truck. I really did. Now, for my previous top surgery, I did pretty fine. I mean, I was woozy under the anesthesia, maybe a little, but I was able to do most things by myself, right? Like, I remember walking to the pharmacy by myself, well, actually with a friend, but, you know, picking up medication right after surgery, and then going to Shake Shack right after, right? So, like, I was able to walk around, I was able to do these things on my own. That was not the case with bottom surgery. And that might just be because I was under anesthesia for a longer time. So with the top surgery, we were looking at maybe an hour or two. With the bottom surgery, my guess is probably around 3 to 6 hours. Haven't yet confirmed. But I was pretty woozy. The room seemed like it was spinning the whole time. There was this constant beeping that was going off that was really starting to get at me. And it turns out that that beeping was because my oxygen levels were pretty low. So they kept telling me, you gotta try to breathe, you gotta breathe more, take in huge deep breaths. That wasn't working, so they gave me what's called an incentive spirometer. It's this sort of tube, right? You blow into the tube, and there's this little tracker that goes up the more you blow. And the idea is that it sort of trains you to strengthen your lungs and to really open it up after surgery. And they wanted me to do this every 15 minutes, and again, it just was not working out. So eventually they got a nasal cannula, which is one of those nose tubes, and they put that up me, and my breathing got a lot better, thankfully. I just went off to sleep, dozed off. So day 2 in the hospital, I'm constantly being waken up every several hours for pain meds, to have certain body temperatures checked, to have the padding on my wounds checked, to have the incision sites evaluated. And so eventually the surgeon, resident, and whatnot, they come in, they look at things, they make sure that the incision sites are not infected. Sometimes the social worker would swing by, would check in on me. And I was actually told day 2 that, I might have had a small hematoma and that I might need to go into emergency surgery. Thankfully, that didn't end up happening. Really, it was just a lot of swelling. They call this edema, but there was just a lot of swelling that they had thought was initially a hematoma. All right. Day 3, I still wasn't allowed to get up at all. I was told that they might actually end up keep me in for a couple extra days. Wasn't really sure why though. I did have a drain in, and that's because I had a DIEP, a DIEP flap. A DIEP flap, that stands for Deep Interior Epigastric Perforator. It's a sort of graft that's often used in reconstructive surgery, so someone might use it for breast reconstruction, for example. They were going to use this graft for the phalloplasty, but in order to utilize it, what they had to do was what's called a delay flap, right? There's 2 major blood vessels in that area. They cut one so that the other becomes thicker and more robust, and then later on they're going to use that blood vessel, the thick one, and harvest it into the graft, basically. But there did end up being a drain-in to drain all the fluid that comes with these huge incisions. Now, I would say one of the things that I was maybe unprepared for when it came to surgery was this delay flap. And the reason why was because I didn't expect the lack of sensation that ended up occurring. I was expecting pain from the surgery itself, but I didn't expect half of my abdomen to just be numb. To sort of put this in perspective, it's like, imagine you're holding a balloon, right? And you're pressing on the balloon, and you see this little divot from where you're pressing. You can feel the pressure as it sort of caves under your hand, but you can't feel the sensation of the balloon itself, right? Like you can't feel what the balloon feels. I mean, the balloon doesn't feel anything, but you know what I mean, right? It's sort of the same where I would touch my abdomen, and it's like, okay, I can see I'm touching it. I can feel the pressure on my fingers of touching it, but I can't feel within the abdomen itself. And to me, that was actually really scary to deal with, to grapple with. Now I'm 2 months post-op. Thankfully, that sensation has come back. All right, moving on. Day 4, they finally allowed me to walk once a day, and it was pretty rough. I was pretty shaky. Someone had to help me get up and about. I was sort of taught how to move my legs. I had to maneuver them so as to reduce the amount of tension that was put on the incision sites. And this reduction of tension was something that they really, really emphasized. When I was laying down, they would often, put a pillow in between my legs so that my legs aren't closing up and forcing or putting any pressure on the incision. Day 5, day 6, really went quite slow. To be honest, at this point, I was kind of going insane from being in the hospital for so long. Like, I just didn't know when I was going to be discharged, because I was at first told that I was only going to be held for 3 days, then that became 4 days, and then that was like, oh, well, maybe we'll hold you for an extra 2 days, maybe we won't. And so I really had no idea when I would end up discharged. It was stressing me out because I had a cat at home. I really wanted to see her. The hospital food was pretty good, but I was kind of craving some homemade food. Now, I did end up discharged the 6th day or so. I had a friend to escort me home, as is required for pretty much any surgery you go through. And thankfully, because I had Medicaid and my state covers gender affirming care, I was able to get transportation home through Medicaid's ambulance. Now, I gotta say, the ride home was incredibly humbling. I had not had a bowel movement since surgery, and bear in mind, this was maybe the 6th or 7th day. So, the experience riding home sort of reminded me of when I was a kid, and it was a 30-minute ride back home from school. I really had to use the restroom, but I couldn't go and I had to hold it in. That was the sort of pain that I was in, rather than any pain from like the incisions, the surgery site, and whatnot. And so that was quite terrible. I just wasn't quite prepared for that as well, because when it came to my top surgery, that was never an issue that ended up happening. And I think that actually lasted around a week and a half. So even when I got home, the stool softeners didn't really help much. That's, if you happen to get bottom surgery, that's something that you might want to be prepared for. And it is a pretty common issue because anesthesia will often stop your intestines, and it takes a while for things to get moving again. Alright, so I'm home, I'm in bed. What does recovery look like for the next couple of weeks? So I still have my catheter in, and typically this doesn't get taken out until around 3 weeks post-op, at least as per my surgeon's instructions. And initially it was the really big overnight bag that they typically give us. So I had to carry it around everywhere because I couldn't just stick it in my pants. I want to say that it was maybe this big. So again, not something you could fit in your pants. But eventually I ended up getting a smaller leg bag, and the leg bag was maybe this big. And that was quite nice. It sort of minimized and reduced the amount of stairs that I was getting on the street. Now, I did end up having visiting nurse services prescribed to me, so someone would check in every 3 days or so, which was quite nice. And insurance considered the VNS services medically necessary as long as they had the Foley catheter in. As far as restrictions go, I was told that I would need to be under a 150 step limit for 4 weeks, which is insanely brutal. That's literally to the bathroom and back. I did end up stocking up on a whole bunch of Soylent, a whole bunch of canned food in case I didn't have a friend around for a couple days or so. But thankfully, I did have a caretaker around for a solid 2 weeks, and then some friends come around after. But I think maybe the biggest bummer was that if I wanted to go out, if I wanted to do something that was more than 150 steps, I had to use a wheelchair. Alright, next up, surprises and complications. So I had a lot of surprises after surgery. Obviously, the numbness from the DIEP Flap was one of them, not something I went in expecting. Some others involved catheter use. So, for instance, I didn't realize that I can't lay down with a catheter in, right? Because the flow of gravity is incorrect, right? Basically, it doesn't end up draining because it's not draining downwards, now it's going this way. And so I didn't realize this until I would have this sense of urgency, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Why do I need to use the restroom if I've got a catheter in? And the moment I got up, the flow, the change of gravity led everything to sort of drain instantly into the bag. I was like, oh, okay, apparently you just have to make sure that your legs aren't elevated when you've got a catheter in. Some more issues with the catheter involve bladder spasms. Again, you shouldn't need to urinate when you've got a catheter in, so you're not supposed to feel the urge. But the first couple days, I would actually end up voiding around the catheter. So urine would sort of leak, and there would be this awful burning sensation. I eventually was prescribed oxybutynin, and that really helped. Alright, so other complications. I was bleeding pretty profusely, and I mean, it was bad. And it went on for weeks, I want to say, maybe 3 weeks or so. One of the things I often read about was that there's a difference between old blood and new blood, right? So old blood, the blood that's leaving your body, should be very dark red, like wine red maybe, whereas new blood is fresh, right? It's a fresh red color. So a lot of the blood was, light red, which didn't seem to be a very amazing indicator, and it was a bit alarming. Now, I'm not sure if this was a byproduct of all of the bleeding, and I'm not sure if this is because I would just forget to breathe after surgery, but accompanied with this loss of blood were fainting episodes. So I had to go to the ER several times because of what they call syncope, vasovagal responses, which is a fancy way of saying that I fainted. My blood levels were consistently lower than usual. I think I fainted maybe a total of 3 separate times, and within those 3 separate times, I would faint multiple times. So I'll give an example. The first time I fainted, I was in the shower, and I sort of passed out, knocked my head on the shower, and then came to, and then passed out again, ended up on the floor. And then I was like, okay, I need to get out of here. I need to go get my caretaker, but I was naked. I was like, I'm not going to call my caretaker in. Like I'm going to man up, put on my underwear, and just leave all by myself. That was not a good idea. I ended up fainting a 3rd time, hit my head, ended up having to go to the ER. And so that was just a very consistent issue that kept happening. I think the last time that I fainted, there was really a lot of blood coming out, and it was so much that I was considering going to the ER. The next day, I woke up and the bleeding just completely stopped, and the fainting, thankfully, hasn't come back. So I would assume that it's probably related a little more to the blood levels. All right. So some other surprises. Edema, that was a pretty big one. Like I said, when I was talking about the hematoma, I was told that there was a lot of fluid down there. And my surgeon's suggestion to treat it or help this fluid move along was by squeezing things, which is as painful as it sounded. I personally didn't think that it helped very much. 0 out of 10 would not recommend, but that is something that it's possible that could be a small complication that comes up. More surprises, I guess sitting down was really difficult for me. I think most of the time I was either lying down or standing up, and it would get to a point where I couldn't sit down for more than 5 minutes or so without constantly shifting, avoiding certain tension being put on certain areas, and this continued for maybe a solid 3 to 4 weeks or so. I did have a donut pillow that a friend lent to me, but I don't think that it ended up helping much. There were times when my friends would come over and I would just decide that instead of sitting down with my friends and playing cards, I would stand or lie down. Now, if you do sit, you would want to sit a little back so that you're minimizing the amount of tension and pressure that you're putting on certain incision sites. The reason why that is, and this is also the reason why they don't want you walking around, is because the more tension, the more pressure, the more likely there is for wound separation. And I gotta say, as many complications and surprises I did have, I thankfully have not had wound separation or a fistula, which was probably what I was scared of the most. Alright, the last and final complication that I want to talk about, that's been the biggest so far when it's come to bottom surgery, is that I've developed a urethral stricture. This is one of the complications that they will typically warn you about. I hear that it's relatively rare to develop this early into recovery when it comes to a metoidiplasty, but I'm not sure if that's verified at all. It's just something that I've heard. But basically, if you don't know, urethral stricture, you can sort of imagine your urethra as a hose, right? If there's a blockage, nothing's coming out. And so that blockage was basically too much scar tissue that ended up building up, and it sort of led to a near full obstruction. So my stream was very weak, lots of burning. I ended up going to the urologist, having a cystoscopy done. That's how they found that there was this scar tissue. And I'm actually having a surgery sometime in September to sort all of that out. But because of the stricture, unfortunately, there's also been issues with UTI. And as awkward as it is to talk about a complication like this, I feel like if you're going into bottom surgery and you want to hear about other people's experiences with these specific surgeries, it's important to acknowledge that this is a possibility, a complication. I was always hopeful that I would heal very well, and I did heal very well, but as much as I didn't get wound separation or a fistula, sometimes you gotta get the short end of the stick somewhere. Stage 1 is over. What's next? Well, next I've got the surgery for the stricture. What that involves is basically, they call it optimum dilation. It's sort of a mix between dilation and the administration of medication that prevents more scar tissue from building up. And then hopefully sometime in December, I've got stage 2 of abdominal phalloplasty, which is just the creation. Overall, when it comes to my thoughts on metoidiplasty, I would say that I'm pretty happy. I'm very satisfied. One of the biggest changes that I noticed was a reduction in my dysphoria. When I was younger, pretty much any time I had a physical examination down there, I would be incredibly upset, incredibly dysphoric, and it was bad. Like, I would have mental breakdowns, I would feel really depressed the entire time. There were some times when it was so bad that the doctor was like, dude, do I need to call CPS? But one of the things that I noticed straight out of surgery, and I mean this was immediate because people were checking on me immediately after surgery, was that dysphoria was gone, right? So if before it was a 10 out of 10, you know, how terrible I felt when people were looking at me down there, now it was like a 3 out of 10. It's like, I got the parts now, you know, it doesn't matter. And so that feeling of comfort and happiness in my body was something that I've thankfully been able to experience. That being said, I do still have dysphoria. I think that phalloplasty would help reduce it further. Again, I love numbers. If I go back to these scales, if my previous dysphoria was 9 out of 10, now I would say it's probably at a 5, 6 out of 10. And I'm hoping the phalloplasty will get me down to a 0 out of 10. As for sensation, yes, I can feel everything. I can feel tactile sensation, pressure related sensation, erotic sensation, and I can get natural erections. When it comes to certain things like, you know, ejaculation, there is that same shooting out feeling. As far as any content actually shooting out, I haven't really been paying attention. So the metoidiplasty is quite wonderful. I can urinate, of course, I can stand to pee. The function is there, fully functional, it's wonderful. Honestly, really the only issue that is currently still causing me some dysphoria is probably the length, because as you know, the metoidiplasty leaves you with the micro. I would like an average size, you know, yeah. Overall, when it comes to recovery, I would say that metoidiplasty was a significantly easier surgery to recover from. The pain really wasn't that bad. I would say I managed most of it with Tylenol and ibuprofen. Very rarely did I take the opioids that were prescribed to me. I would categorize the pain as a 4 out of 10, right? So top surgery was probably a 3 out of 10, and top surgery had more of this buzzing sort of feeling, right? Whereas bottom surgery was maybe a 4 out of 10, and there was more of this burning sort of feeling, but it really wasn't that bad. Now, if I didn't take ibuprofen or Tylenol, or if I walked away too much, then it would sort of escalate to a 6 or a 7 out of 10. The recovery, of course, is brutal if you don't have anyone around. You won't be able to do anything by yourself, most likely. There were some times when I would push myself and take a longer walk than usual, but I wouldn't bang on anything. I think it's definitely best to have a very strong support system around you. But that's about all I've got in terms of my bottom surgery. If you've got any questions, any requests to elaborate on specific aspects, feel free to comment below and I'll do my best to answer them. If you've enjoyed this content and would like to see similar videos, feel free to like and subscribe below. And yeah, take care.